Welcome back, everybody. This is the AI update on AI X Higher Ed podcast for September 17th, 2025.
It's great to be back. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on constantly. Today we're going to cover some AI usage reports that have just been released by the major labs, including and then a couple applications, including one that came out just before we started this podcast by Google called Learn Your Way. Some projections for where all this is heading, increases in robotics capabilities, agentic coding, which is really taking off, and we're starting to see a little bit of agentic AI societies, as well as, of course, our normal jobs and entertainment. And I just added a little bit on universities, which I forgot to bolt. So we're go fast. You know, Anna and I were debaters. We talk fast, so we're gonna cover content and we're gonna cover it quickly.
All right. Well, that said, we'll move on to use reports. And the first one is one coming from OpenAI. And this is a graphic that Connor Grennan has shared on LinkedIn and showing some specific uses, how people are actually using ChatGPT and looking at it in terms of images, video, practical guidance, specific information, writing, coding. Another recent guest of ours, Tim Dacey, had a really, I think, really helpful comment on LinkedIn talking about this specific post, saying that it would be helpful not only to know what they're using it for, but how they're using it. And maybe the next step is for the models to be able to release information evaluating how well someone is able to deploy that tool in specific ways. So if you're doing it for writing, how are you using it for writing? Is it in terms of reflecting on the draft that you have? Is it just producing the content? Maybe that's the kind of feedback, even if it's just simple as the beginner level or intermediate or advanced level, to get a better sense of how people are using it and what they're using it for.
Yeah, the one thing I want to say quickly on that one in a transition to this one is that that just covered like personal accounts. So free accounts, the $20 or the individual $200 a month. It didn't cover like the enterprise level use. And this kind of takes us into Claude by Anthropic, who released a report on the same day. I'm sure that, they both kind of agreed to do this about their usage. But Claude has, far fewer individual users, but more enterprise users, right? So what they released was basically about the enterprise, but in even the individual use, right? We're seeing an increase in educational tasks from 9 to 12%, basically, an increase in scientific tasks. There's a lot of coding with Claude that people are using for, but what is interesting is that they have, and remember, they're mostly at the business enterprise level. They have a lot of automation. They're seeing that people are really using this to automate workflows, which replaces people. It was interesting because somebody I saw a comment just on the ChatGPT one. I don't think they knew the Claude one was out. They said, "Hey, this is great. It's just augmenting people, right? It's not showing any replacement." And I pointed out, well, that's just kind of the personal accounts, but we're at the
Not the
enterprise
enterprise.
level. We are seeing automation.
Yeah. And this is definitely something we're seeing in terms of agentic AI and giving more autonomy and complete control over delegating really complete tasks to Claude and in other platforms.
There's a couple new kind of surveys that were released by the Alan Turing Institute in this report. A friend of ours, Sophia Finichel from the founder of Study Hall, kind of summarized them for us. I haven't had a chance to read it, but you just flip on, it covers the first one was about how teachers are using it, right? And, it's saying that 66% of teachers are using it for their work, 71% are accessing it through their personal accounts, right? Because only 29%, I think, yeah, 20 or 26% receiving institutional access. So that's one thing, to think about. Okay, teachers are using it, not using on institutional accounts. So depending on, what their literacy is in terms of privacy and stuff like that. But 85% are reporting increased productivity. They're feeling confident using the tools. They think it helps improve their teaching. They are kind of worried about some students using it kind of, in the way they're not supposed to. And I think the one thing that really hit me, was 80. They're kind of worried about how 72% at the bottom, concerned about the students' critical thinking skills using it. And, I think probably because they see that, they're not, a lot of them maybe aren't changing the assignments and they're just, they know the kids are using the tool to complete the old-fashioned assignment, which, is a place that additional instructional support is going to be needed.
It was also interesting to see that 80% of the teachers believe that AI will support their work as teachers rather than replace aspects of their roles. And this probably speaks also to that concern about the loss of certain skills, that there's probably recognition that a skilled teacher in that role is going to be able to do more than current AI tools.
Yeah, and then she kind of put on here, just hey, we shouldn't make the teachers pay for this. So that was just kind of the bottom of that. On the next one, right, it's talking about kids' usage statistics, and the first one's kind of a little shocking. 22%. I don't know about shocking, but got to really think about what it means. 22% of children ages 8 to 12 are using these tools, right, which is way below like the age requirements of kind of at least the standard models. So they're using them for image generation, for information seeking, homework assistance, but they're also kind of using it, for companionship and stuff like that, getting personal advice, right? And we'll talk more about that minute. Or yeah, OpenAI is putting some new rules to try to limit that. We'll talk about it in a minute, but you have pretty widespread usage even at younger ages.
Now,
And
speaking of what Stefan was just mentioning about the concerns and parent concerns about AI chatbots for companionship, or some of the cases that we've talked about on this podcast of suicides and self-harm, parents are calling for more guardrails, and that's something that OpenAI is responding to with this current announcement.
yeah, they're saying that, and I read another article on this before we started. It said that by the end of September, these restrictions are going to be in place. They're only going to let kids 18 or over access this without some kind of parental permission or support. And they can kind of tell a lot from the users how the person is using it from their age. But if the system's unsure at all, it's going to kind of restrict their access and without parental permission. So that's good, right? We all knew the kind of the age they wanted people to be 18, but we knew everybody was using it. I mean, we just look at the past studies. The past studies are limited to OpenAI only, but that has the most consumer usage with close to 800 million people using it. So it's good. It's good to see this because obviously these systems. I mean, can say or do anything. People at first are worried that, they would just say something mean or generate like a nasty image you don't want kids to see. And, that really hasn't been a problem, at least in a more meaningful way. But, talking through with I think what a 16-year-old about committing suicide and all these kind of things. Got to get some guardrails here.
And the guardrails really need to advance as the models are advancing. When they develop new capabilities, then we really need to see the models, the companies keeping up with those developments, offering the guardrails, support for parents and for teachers. This is a very positive first step, but there's still a ways to go to make sure that we provide that kind of support.
And we're seeing some new applications in hardware. Like I say, the first one we'll talk about. I originally had hardware, and then I was like, oh, applications and hardware. Because Google literally released this thing, I think around 6 o'clock today. It's called Learn Your Way, Reimagining Textbooks with Generative AI. It's something that people always talked about happening. And, I saw Pearson, I think it was, try to get into this a little bit more. But this is by Neil Hoyne, who's a chief strategist at Google, right? And basically, you can kind of take any textbook, a PDF, and turn it into interactive lessons based on your grade level, interests. You can create the mind maps and the quizzes. Look, we already saw that in Notebook LM from Google, so that's not surprising. Audio lessons from the source material, again, kind of stuff that could basically be pulled out. And they say that in one study, of course, they did, but the study, the students remembered more, right? Which makes sense, right? I mean, they're interacting with in a dynamic way, and we'll see a couple images about how it adapts to the students' interests. So, this is pretty positive, right? Like this is so the thing that they provided, right? Okay, it's immersive text. It gives slides and narration, audio lesson, the mind map. It personalizes it to give examples of the student. What is the student interested in, and puts an embedded question and generating images and has a section level quiz. And as we'll see, I believe it's on the next slide. They'll even give you like they'll generate they'll change the content based on your age. I mean, this is just an example, right? Say, okay, well, 11th grade we'll do like basketball, okay, and fifth grade we'll do like this paintbrush thing. So it's kind of basically the same kind of content, right? I mean, obviously there's probably generally different content in younger ages, but it's basically taking the same content and saying, okay, well, let's teach this to a high school student, and then let's teach this to a lower middle school, upper elementary school student, it gives personalized slides, right? Based on the student's interest in quizzes, right? So it's still testing the same content, but in a different way, and it's generating the images. This is stuff people have talked about, like, oh, AI should enable personalized learning. And I remember, like, when ChatGPT 3.5 came out, 2 months later, they're like, look, they're lying. It doesn't do personalized learning. It's like, well, yeah, that doesn't. People are just saying it's coming because, once it has memory and it learns about you and all these things, right? Which have taken some time. So now we're starting to see that.
When we saw the study that came from the World Bank of Africa, where they use personalized tutor bots, that was a small scale study. When you hear about schools like Alpha School, where they're offering personalized instruction, we've seen instances of this happening. This is the first larger scale, potentially larger scale. It hasn't been made widely available yet. But when Google makes this available, it's going to be available to millions of students. And there'll be a lot of schools that are already Google schools that might be able to turn this on very easily. This is the widespread individualized instruction that a lot of educators have been calling for, the parents have been calling for. It's exciting to see, and it'll be really interesting to see how well this works. I looked into it. Currently, you can join in a wait list to be able to access it, and they're using it for research purposes. They want to be able to get individualized feedback, very detailed feedback about the use by the student and your role if you're actually making this available to your student or for a class. So they're taking this very carefully and developing another research bank of the kinds of feedback they'll need to make this work even better. But I'm excited to see this happen, and I would love to see this in more classrooms.
Yeah, and they have a paper that you can read. You just go. Well, we'll put it with the stuff, but it's just called Towards an AI Augmented Textbook.
Good. Also, coming this week are Meta's new smart glasses. Lots of expectations coming about in terms of what this will mean. And we know, of course, that they've expanded the different types of styles and making it a little more accessible and more fashionable for different audiences. But what that next level is going to mean in terms of what Meta's AI models will be able to support and how they'll be able to integrate it, there's a great deal of potential here.
And some the other thing that came out today, our podcast is very like cutting edge, right? This just came out today, a new report by Epic AI, and they kind of projects like where AI will be by 2030. And some people actually accuse Epic of being a little bit hypey, and some of their projections haven't like I wouldn't say they turned out to be false. They maybe took like a couple more years, but other of their projections have actually, the reality has exceeded the length of the projection. And here it's just showing like within the next few years, like software engineering, like, end of 2025, 2026, right? We're going on the sweet bench, by 2027, right? It's human level biology, kind of human. It's a wider range. But it's human level. This is a specific biology benchmarks, even in a wet lab, right? It's going to be able to answer open-ended questions to guide kind of wet labs, and that's by 2028. So it's just really incredible, kind of what's projecting out, like kind of being able to do like all higher level science, right? Like I've said, kind of the models have got past anything that I would kind of know how, the level of science or economics that I know how to do. They're already past that, but now we're talking top level researcher.
We're really getting to the point where they're able to solve many of the problems that humans are grappling with. It's more than just being able to perform at a human level, but being able to perform beyond that. And that's what the curve is certainly suggesting. They'll be able to get to that stage. Really hard to project what that means in terms of other developments for novel research, for solving many of these problems. But it certainly looks like the curve is continuing at that same pace, and a lot of reason to think that it'll get there. Maybe not on exactly that timeline, but there's very little reason to think that it won't actually get there at some point.
And we're seeing really rapid advances in robotics. The in OpenAI, OpenAI originally was doing some robotics research, and then they're like, "Oh, this is not really going to pan out." And they saw a little bit of the, that attention is all you need paper, and they shifted to the language models. But now they're going back, right, to robotics, and it's not even clear that they really want to compete in the robotic space, but they think it's going to be a critical element to AGI, which makes sense, right? Because you don't, it's not just like language or like kind of what's in your head or like what you see. It's like all the way like how you interact with the world, like is
Yeah.
how you learn. and they want to kind of work with robots to learn about the world. I think basically what it comes down to.
Embodied AI is certainly something that we've talked a bit about before in previous episodes. That's an important component of this because it's one thing to understand language, but the interaction with the world is going to give them a lot of insight into how other processing can occur. And when you see programs like Figure, where they've received a new valuation, latest funding round, and really doing more advanced work, that's important to follow, as well as some of these other developments coming out of places like China's work with humanoid robots, and researchers doing things like building these robot factories that are learning by watching humans, other simulated humanoid robots learning to hike rugged terrain autonomously. When you get into a stage where the robotics is built on models that are recursive, able to learn and be able to help design their own next steps in terms of development, that's when you're probably going to see a more exponential development curve in terms of what they're able to do, and they're going to be able to deploy them in many different areas. I don't think it'll be far off before we're able to see humanoid robots that are able to do a lot of the functions we've been waiting for them to do, and be able to do them fairly easily. It's just a matter of finding a way for them to be cheap enough and to build enough of them that we start using them day to day.
Yeah, I mean, this is from Stanford. They have this new test, right? Everybody has like these AGI tests or whatever, right? And this is kind of like a physical AI test called Behavior 1K, and they're trying to get the robots, once the robots can do all 1,000 of these household chores, they'll decide they okay, well, it's achieved this, whether we call that robotics AGI or not is up for debate, but they're able to do a lot of things. I hopefully I didn't mention it last week, but I don't want to be repetitive. But someone said, one of these figure robots, it picked two towels out of the laundry basket, but it realized it couldn't fold two towels at once. So just like a human, it put one of them back in the basket, and when it was finished folding the first one, it folded the second one, and it was never trained to do that. So we're starting to see generalization of the models, and now we have some sophisticated tests.
I don't know if the Behavior 1K benchmark is necessarily going to be a selling point for AGI as much as the selling point to why you should buy one of these at Costco because it can do all the work you need to do at home. I'll be looking for one, certainly.
And then I just saw, I saw this next thing, it just popped up, someone was like, hey, I'm in Miami and we've got Uber autonomous delivery. And then, it just kind of showed the thing go around and complete the delivery. So
We've had college campuses with some of these that are not quite as autonomous, but these little robotic delivery machines that are going around, becoming more ubiquitous, certainly.
So, we've seen, a lot of, there's a lot of companies, right, with autonomous kind of coding agents, basically, some of them you can use directly through the API from, Claude and OpenAI. They released another update to theirs, but there's a lot of like Cursor, this company Replit, which I use with some students over the summer, and it can now where they released Agent 3 this week, which can now code autonomously for 200 minutes approximately, right, depending on the task. It can correct its own errors and all these kind of things. So, we can see the acceleration of the agents, right? Like, 2 minutes for a while, not that long ago, but probably a year and a half ago. February, 20 minutes. And now September, 200 minutes, which is interesting because I listened to podcast over the summer by the founder of Meter, which is like a nonprofit AI safety. And they said it was doubling like every 7 months. So this person was like, oh, 20, 7 months from now, they'll be able to do 40 minutes. All right, 14 months, they'll be able to 80 minutes. That's an hour and a half, right? So we're already at 200 minutes, not you just, not, yeah, what, like 8 months
Yep.
later, right?
And
So,
more than just the autonomous action, it's also I noticed a difference. I've used Replit fairly extensively, and the differences between March, April, and May were astonishing. Not only that it could operate autonomously longer period of time, but it also built in more iterative action steps so that it was able to fix some of the errors, be able to look at what some of the errors could be, and anticipate what could be done. And now when you get to Agent 3, it's being able to expand those capabilities even further and be able to work for up to 200 minutes autonomously. There's a great example of something that was developed, and Stefan can tell a little bit about this story. He read about this recently.
yeah, and this is like, I don't know exactly what, how the Replit thing works, right? I'm sure it's probably more than one kind of coding agent, like so to speak, like operating at one time, but it's just a basic consumer product. This person who, kind of knew, more technical, obviously knew what they were doing, He decided he needed to get this software platform ready, and like on his 6 hour flight, he built like 50 React components, a mock API. He goes through all these things, and he says, "Look, this would have taken a human team, 18 to a team, right? Not one person, a team, 18 developer days, basically about 3 weeks, right? And he did all this in 6 hours." And it's fully documented. He said it's more than a prototype, which is important because a lot of people were saying, what you can build with Replit now, it's useful, but it's just a prototype. You got to get other developers to build it out. He says it's more in a prototype. It's fully documented, tested, secured. That's the other thing they say was missing. It's a secured application framework, complete with production-ready Docker configs and a CI/CD pipeline, right? So, and he's like, I will never build a software company the same way again, I promise, right? So, there's a person with a lot of experience, but look what he's able to do. Look what people are able to build, right? In almost no time.
And think about this in a number of ways. We've talked a bit about autonomous action, and we mentioned that earlier in this episode where people are using Claude for more autonomous action and agentic action. Then we talked a little bit about how Replit and many of these tools have been able to expand the amount of time a tool is able to work autonomously by itself. This is an example of Claude Code being able to do that autonomous action for a longer period of time, but not just with one instance, but a swarm of Claude Code agents effectively being able to work through different components at the same time. So it just rapidly expands and really exponentially increases the capabilities when you're not just moving from one instance of an agent being able to do maybe twice as many minutes. Now you're able to expand radically the number of minutes, able to act autonomously, able to have a swarm of these agents working together. And that's how you're able to get so much more done that quickly. We're going to see this. We're going to be able to see ways that people are deploying this in the workplace, certainly. And this isn't going to be an isolated instance.
Yeah, and we've also seen some flirting kind of so to speak with AI societies, right? So there's I'm trying to get a code for this. If anyone's listening has a connection to a code, hook me up, right? But humans are going to be part of this, but they're going to have 22,000 AI agents simulate what a future society might look like. I think it's run by the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, right? Pretty impressive. So kind of just starting to, and the world's going to change a lot. It's going to be human and AI agents, and 22,000 is really actually sounds it's a lot to us, but you're going to have societies with millions of autonomous AI agents.
There's always been discussion of are we living in a simulation? Well, now we can run our own simulations to be able to see exactly how something might play out.
And the Albania made the headlines by saying they're going to have the world's first cabinet AI minister appointed. I guess they can't legally make it a voting cabinet member, which makes sense. But they're going to do some stuff with to fight corruption. I mean, look, it's just going to be an AI that kind of like goes through financial records and looks for potential corruption. But it's a cool play. But I also think it's like when I say, oh, it's just an AI that like kind of goes to the financial record. What's an AI agent's going to be, right? It's not going to be like it's not going to be a person dressed up at the cabinet meeting, right? To look like a cabinet officer. But that's it's a new reality.
Now, moving on to some new changes and new developments in universities and AI and higher ed. Um, Stefan, you can talk a little bit about this first one, talking about how the impact of AI in university education is being felt.
Yeah, I mean, it's getting widespread, right? And it's, there's kind of the old like, well, AI is a skill, right? We have that, but it's just changing, how kids learn. And if you just think back to the one example, right, of the textbook coming to life we kind of talked about and how students are going to be able to interact with it. I mean, that kind of just kind of changes the whole way, the whole speed at which it changes the speed at which kids learn, how they learn how these like kind of AIs are gonna, they're kind of there in the classroom essentially as like a teaching assistant, right? You're gonna be the students are gonna be able to learn more and more directly from the AI, right? Like there's gonna be all these cooperative things. So it's changing how learning is occurring across the board.
Then there's this other development that's coming from Brandeis University, and the president of Brandeis, Arthur Levine, put out a blueprint for reimagining what a liberal arts education can look like. And this is something that really resonated with me because coming from a liberal arts institution and thinking quite a bit about what does the liberal arts education look like in the age of AI. This is a development where it's really a focus on career development and incorporating a number of career related skill sets. I think there's a lot of potential here. And this whole plan to reinvent the liberal arts is something that's very closely aligned with what some of the most forward thinking universities are trying to work on. It's going to be interesting to see how they develop this and what they're able to do with it.
Yeah, I think too, I mentioned to someone, Brandeis is right outside of Boston, right? So a lot of companies, even a lot of tech companies right out of Boston on the corridor there, but also inside, right? So, and I think we're also seeing that because it also responds to the meta question, kids are struggling with, well, what's the value of this? My learning? I'm going to get a job, right? Even independent of the AI that has value. And, I saw this as like community college, but, this whole idea of problem solving, right? They want to help community college students transform their boldest ideas into impactful real world solutions, right? A lot of people have ideas and, they just kind of need help doing that. And AI can provide a lot of support. So that's reaching into a whole other set of students.
Now, moving on to some challenges that are ongoing with AI. And the first has to do with job disruption.
Yeah, we've seen more and more people say, "Well, we're going to have a three day work week." And when I texted this to you earlier, you're like, "Yeah, but we're only going to get paid for 2 days." You didn't even say three. I showed it to someone else, and he was like, "Oh, great." He's like, "I don't need to work 5 days." I'm like, "Yeah, but there's this 2 day, 3 day pay problem." So it is interesting to think about. I was thinking about it a little bit. It's like in a more equitable society, you say, okay, well, we're gonna have everybody work like whatever it is, 2, 3, 4 days instead of five, right? We don't need this, but then it's like, well, some people are gonna say, but yeah, well, I'll just keep my best employees working 5 days, and I'll get rid of, who I think are the bottom 20% or 40% or whatever. So it sounds nice to say everybody has a 3 day work week, but we don't know that they're gonna continue to get paid as much. We don't know that that's how companies are gonna it's just kind of almost to me like it's not how everything else is played out, right? And companies are getting look, even you say what was at Salesforce, right? They went from like 9,000 sales support agents to or customer service agents, I can't remember which one it was, to like 5,000. So they reduced 4,000 people. They didn't just say, well, hey, everyone can work 4 days a week and we're gonna pay you the same amount of money. They said, look, we're going to get rid of, so I'm not really so confident that this is going to have to play out, and it's kind of probably one of the biggest questions, facing society right now.
I think the problem with projections like this is that most of the time it comes down to somebody thinking about what it'll look like 10, 15, 20 years down the road, that there'll be so much less work for humans to do that it would make sense that everybody will just work 3 days a week. But it's that transition that is never really discussed or addressed, like Stefan is saying. There's a real concern about how that plays out. And I think even if it does end up some point down the road where everybody has a 3 day work week. That's only after we work through issues about universal basic income and support systems. And we don't really have a political climate right now that is likely to support people that are unemployed because they've been their jobs have been disrupted because of AI, or a political climate that is ready to tell companies that they can't disrupt their workplace in that way and that they have to provide certain levels of employment. I think it's going to get really messy before it gets any better, certainly.
One thing, just briefly on that, that's interesting is it's caused kind of a little bit of a split in the Republican Party, even in the more MAGA supporters. There's Josh, the was a senator, I think from Missouri.
Holly,
Um,
yeah.
Yeah, Holly and the House member from yeah, Marjorie Taylor Greene, saying like, "Hey, what's going on? Like, if we keep advancing AI, all these people are gonna lose their jobs." And I think Josh is kind of religious. He's like, "Well, wait a minute. People are this is gonna replace like who we are, like our identity. Like what?" And they seem surprised that all this stuff is occurring. And I definitely, it'd be interesting to see how that happens because they're like, hey, Trump's really promoting this, but it's going to cause all this unemployment, and they're just oddly like cluing into that right now, and there's still talk. I mean, see, Ted Cruz was I guess in the continuing resolution, they want to bring back the thing that says states can't regulate AI for 10 years, which is probably past the point of singularity. I don't even understand like why you would do that. But there's clearly a divide within the Republican Party on, what type of supports we want to provide for people in society, or if we want to slow this down.
And
So
a lot of it, I think, is just a difference between short-term thinking and long-term thinking. The short-term accelerationists see the economic benefits of what's happening with companies that are making a lot more money, propping up the economy. And I think that's probably going to have to be sorted out in the coming months when we're probably going to face more of an economic downturn or more challenges. And you're right, there are others within the party. They're realizing the long-term consequences are something they're really not ready for.
And just I don't know if you have a chance, I didn't have a chance to look at this one, but they're putting, I guess, of the AI video generation into the YouTube Shorts, which we've started using to promote the podcast.
Yeah, we're not doing AI video generation in our shorts yet,
Right.
but in YouTube shorts. But this is an interesting development. It certainly feeds into the concerns about a lot of AI slop, as some people would say, being churned out, and more of that developing into YouTube shorts. We've seen this in lots of other areas with AI generated content. It's not surprising that Google will put this in with its YouTube platform to be able to generate greater engagement, but certainly something to be a little wary of.
And that's it for this week. It turned out to be a lot. Sometimes I feel, one thing I actually notice is happening is a lot of new stuff comes out on Mondays. I've
Oh,
almost
yeah.
like, yeah, and we record this on Tuesday nights, so it's not terribly surprising. There's usually a couple more things on after we record it, and then not much on the weekend, and then we kind of get flooded early in the week. But thanks for joining us here all the way to the end. I know it's a lot every week that we're talking about, but if you just think briefly about like some of these details, it kind of gives you the idea of, how quickly things are accelerating on the board. So, if you're a teacher, educational administrator, I think the really important point is to pay attention and start thinking about, how you want to react to this. If you haven't reacted yet, or maybe differently, there's no one has any set answers. I said this yesterday. Everyone has ideas, right? Nobody has any like definitive best ways to do this. So, uh, thanks for listening.
Yep. Thanks. We'll see you again next week.